So I'm here today at Marsh Farm, Godalming on Harris Lake, and we're going to be doing some tench fishing on the float. We might be lucky and get the odd bonus crucian as well, but it's tench that we're after. And I've been fishing for 30 minutes and I've had a good start. I've had a little crucian. I've also got a nice tench in the net, so let's have a look at it. First fish of the day, a lovely little Harris Lake tench. Caught on the float. Let's show you the way we set the float rod and the float up and catch a few more. The fish on this lake are quite pressured, so I'm actually using a little bit more of a sensitive float than perhaps I might ordinarily do. I'm not going to use a waggler, I'm going to use a Preston pole float. It's a nice thin streamlined float with a nice balsa tip, and then that goes down to a little string of number 6 shot, then my hook length, which is the Coram worm and caster hook length in a 16 with a couple of number 8 droppers. Let's get cast out, see if we can get a few more bites. So giving some thought to swim choice, as you can see it's a bright sunny day, so I'm looking for some features. So I've got a swim that's it's got some lily pads both sides, left and right, and it's just a nice little underarm flick, which is just the spot for fishing with the pole float on. Oh, missed a bite. Yes, perfect spot for fishing nice and close in using a pole float. You can't fish this sort of method too far out because you're going to get the float's going to get dragged out of position because it's fished top and bottom. And we're also on the end of the wind, so I've got a nice ripple blowing into the swim, which when it's a hot day like that, like it is today, that might be the difference. So that tench I had early on and those last few little crucians have been on a double dead red maggot. It's often the case that a dead maggot will get you a bite when a live one won't, so it's always worth bringing a few along. And what I do to get the dead maggots is I put a few in a bait box and I put the bait box in the freezer. Don't need lots, it's just hook baits really. Might feed a few, but it's really just for hook bait. I've got a selection of other baits with me as well. I've got some F1 corn. I've been feeding a little bit of hemp. I've got some Sonu baits, worm ground bait, and I've got some S-pellet hookers as well. And I've also got a tub of dendrobinas. I don't think we'll be needing them. If I'm trying to get away from the little crucians, I shall just put a bit of F1 corn on and wait for a better fish to pick it up. Well, we've given it a couple of hours on Harris, and I've had a tench, quite a few crucians. I think that sun's a bit bright, and I'm going to go and see if I can find some shade on Richardson's Lake, so we're going to have a move. Gears on the barra, let's go and get set up again. Okay, so I've got to my new swim, found a bit of shade with some pads next to us as well. So being such a hot day and so bright, I'm just trying to give myself some advantage and see if we can winkle out some tench. So the first thing I'm going to do is find out the depth, so therefore I'm going to have to use a plummet. So to attach the plummet, hook goes through the eye at the top of the plummet, you thread it through and it hooks into the cork or the rubber on the bottom. So now the weight of that is going to take the float under. So let's see how deep it is. So the advantage of using the pole float here is that I can lower it in from the rod tip and I can actually feel the plummet down and touch the bottom. And by plumbing up there, I've got the exact depth, which is, I'm right there, right on the bristle of the float. So by the time I put a bait on, the bait's going to be just touching the bottom, which for tench being a bottom feeder is how I want to be fishing. That rod bending, absolutely perfect. Well, we made the move, and after 15 minutes of feeding with a bit of hemp, a few grains of F1 corn, a few sticky pellets in 2 mil, we've got ourselves a bite. That's what we've come for, another tench. You lively fella. Bar of soap. He's a male, this one. You can tell he's got nice big pecs and nice little lumps on his side. Just goes to show, don't sit in one swim all day waiting for it to happen. If it's not happening, move. Let's see if we can get another one. So I've had a nice day's tench fishing. I've had several now after a couple of moves, and if I just have a look back over the day and give you some tips, my top 5 tips would be, firstly, pick your venue. Here at Godalming's Marsh Farm, it's day ticket, just turn up and fish. We've fished on both, I'm watching my float as well here, we've fished on both Harris Lake and Richardson's. Started on Harris, had some nice tench and crucians. That's a crucian just jumped out, and the sun got up and the swim got really bright. So think about your venue. We've swapped venues, we've swapped from one lake to the other, and we've started catching again, which moves me on to my second tip. When it's a bright day like today, try and find some cover. Pick a swim that's in the shade, or at least the water that you're going to be fishing into is in the shade. We've moved round to a swim that's got some nice pads that have, oh, missed it. Yeah, we've moved round to a swim that's got some pads in, and that's got us a few more bites, but now the sun's moved round in this swim too and the bites have dried up. So third tip, bait selection. I had a few on corn and stopped catching on the corn, so I swapped to a double dead red maggot, and again that got me a few more bites. So you need a bait selection. That goes with feeding as well. I've been feeding hemp and feeding a few grains of corn and putting in little nuggets of ground bait and little nuggets of sticky pellets in 2 mil. So fourth tip I would say is think about your float selection. Because I'm not fishing very far out, literally almost under my rod tip, I've used a nice, delicate, sensitive pole float. I've seen every bite really clearly. If the wind had got up, I'd have been thinking about using a waggler, and started off probably with an insert waggler, and if it got really windy, then just a straight peacock waggler. And lastly, feeding. I mentioned feeding the micro pellet and the ground bait and the corn, just little and often. I'd rather catch them than feed them. So just fish for one fish at a time. Get your bite, then a little bit more feed, just little and often. Build the swim up. So there's 5 tips, 5 things to think about next time you go fishing.